The Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux, recently released a report on carbon pricing and Canada's greenhouse gas emissions to 2030. And it's got all sorts of interesting little tidbits in it. So we're going to talk to economist Michael Bernstein from Canadians for Clean Prosperity about the report. Welcome to the interview, Michael.
Thanks, Markham.
Well, what's your take on this?
I think the report was an interesting report in showing that we have a long way to go in order to decarbonize our economy. It was trying to explain how can we get to a 36% reduction below 2005 levels, which we've now the government has since, of course, announced they want to even go further and go to 40 to 45%. And it was pointing out that carbon pricing can do a lot of the heavy lifting. It can get almost 100 megatons of additional reductions by raising the price. And yet there still is going to be a significant gap to meeting our targets. And so we're going to need to think with very clear eyes about how we're going to put a package of policies on the table to really meet those goals and do it in a way that's economically affordable.
Now, I've interviewed you a number of times on carbon pricing, and I think in the past you've said that carbon pricing can get us about half of the way to our decarbonization goals, and we need regulations and industrial policy to get us the rest of the way. My take on this, and I echo some of the experts I've interviewed about the other policy initiatives, is that Canada actually has a pretty robust suite of climate policies that can probably get us to the other 50%. Is that fair to say?
I think we have a strong start, and I think it's true that we have a number of other policies, and it's a promising start. But we have such a long road to travel, and it's not just Canada, of course; it's everywhere around the world. But just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the challenge, we need to reduce emissions by the same amount that we reduced them under the COVID pandemic every year from now through 2050 for the next 28 years, just to stay somewhat on track to net zero. So that is a monumental challenge, and we can't do it with 1, 2, 3, or 4 policies. We're going to need a wide range of policies. We have policies that are going to get us real reductions, hundreds of millions of tons of emissions reductions, but we've got to do more. So there's still a lot of work to do.
Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer suggested that transportation and oil and gas will be the hardest hit sectors this decade. What's your take on that? And I asked the question because I thought that actually transportation, given the fact that the electric vehicle sector is expanding so rapidly, that might be kind of a wash when it comes to the transition. Oil and gas, I get, because that's going to take a lot of work to get emissions out of oil and gas. So anyway, what's your take on that?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that across all these sectors, it actually takes a lot longer than folks might think to fully replace the existing stock of equipment. So even on vehicles, yes, you do have a lot of electric vehicles being sold. I think we're up to nearly 10% in BC, for example, which is the leading jurisdiction in Canada. But as that report points out, we would need to be at half of sales across the whole country going electric starting in 2022 in order to be where we want on transportation. So the reason why even in transportation you see significant costs is because we're going to need additional policy to help retire some of the existing cars we have on the roads, and not just cars, trucks and other modes of transport, earlier than we might otherwise do it. So that's why you get the cost, and it's a similar story in oil and gas and many other sectors where you're going to need, as you rightly say, large investments in new equipment earlier than the companies might otherwise choose to retire their existing equipment.
Now, one of the other things that came out in the study was that there will be an impact, a reduction in gross domestic product by 2030. And I think it's on the magnitude of about 1.4%. Did that come as a surprise to you?
It was higher than I expected, but I have to say that I don't take those forecasts particularly seriously for a couple of reasons. One is it is very difficult by PBO's own admission to model in some of the changes in technology and productivity gains you're going to get by investing in clean technology. And secondly, and again, it's stated explicitly in the report, so it's not a critique, but again, another thing is they don't compare that to what the cost of inaction will be in terms of the impacts of climate change, which we know from a number of other studies are going to be very, very large. There was a study recently by Swiss Re, an insurer in Europe, that said $100 billion would GDP impact to the Canadian economy by 2050. So I don't think inaction is really an option. And the package of policies that the PBO modeled, we know are lower cost than alternatives. So in my mind, I think it shouldn't be something people spend too much time thinking about from that particular report anyway.
Now let's talk about that other commitment that the Prime Minister has made to go from 36% to 40 or 45%, which works out to be 30 to 66 megatons a year by 2030. Now, if you look at the four sectors of the Canadian economy, so we've got the electricity sector, we've got transportation, buildings, and industry. Canada does pretty well on the electricity side. We're already like 82% no or low emitting because we get a lot of hydropower and nuclear. Transportation is probably the other sector that I think experts agree can be more quickly decarbonized, and buildings and industry will be slower to decarbonize. We don't have the same kind of mature technologies that we do on the other two sectors. That seems to me to be really puts the pressure on the government to achieve its goals, because there just doesn't seem to be the low-hanging fruit available over the next 9 years in the power sector and the transportation sector. And the other two look like they're going to be 2030s and 2040s. Have I got it right, or what's your take?
I think well, first of all, I just wanted to say on the economy side, maybe just one last point, which is that I don't want to undermine the fact or minimize the fact that there will be significant economic impacts from climate action. So we do need to be aware of those, and we do need to be compensating individuals and regions that are facing challenges because of the transition. So I just wanted to be clear about that. But in terms of the challenge we have here, absolutely, I think that's correct in terms of the monumental challenge we have to get to 2030. And one thing that I think people should keep in mind is the ultimate goal here is to reduce the total amount of emissions we put in the air before we stop emitting. In other words, it would be really nice to hit the targets we set for 2030, but more important than that is trying to minimize the total amount of emissions, getting to net zero as quickly as we can, and probably going negative later. So what I hope we avoid is taking actions that may be particularly costly or challenging just to meet our 2030 goals, and losing our need to focus on the ultimate prize, which is how do we decarbonize our economy over the next couple of decades. So the challenge is very big, and we'll have to see what other additional policies the government puts on the table.
And one last thing, Michael, before I let you go. One of the complicating factors in Canada is we have a very decentralized federation. So a lot of these policies, or at least a good number of them, are going to fall to the provinces. And you have governments in key provinces like Alberta, for instance. I mean, oil and gas is responsible for 26% of Canadian greenhouse gas emissions. And you've got a government run by Jason Kenney that is reluctant to penalize the industry any more than it has to get emissions down. And the federal government doesn't have a lot of jurisdiction in this area. So does that make it just that much more difficult?
Well, the one thing that I think is actually pretty encouraging that's happened recently is that there has been signals from both the provincial government in Alberta and the federal government that they're going to be partners in helping not only the oil decarbonize. And there's been some of the announcements I'm thinking of, for example, are the Alberta government's signal that they're going to create a shared sequestration space in Alberta that's going to allow heavy industry, including oil and gas, to start capturing more, or to lower the cost anyway of capturing emissions and sequestering them underground. I'm also encouraged by the oil and gas sector's commitment, the oil sands companies specifically committing to a net zero target, though clearly we need to see more policy and more specific actions to follow that up. So I think you're right to wonder whether the government has both provincially, I guess in particular your question was about the provincial government, whether they're going to ramp up their ambition, because they will need to. But I would simply point out that there have been a few encouraging signs lately that I hope the government will build on in order to help the country as a whole and that province reach our decarbonization goals.
So I guess this brings us full circle to your initial observation, Michael, that we've got a lot of policy in place, but big challenges ahead of us. And it's not guaranteed by any stretch that Canada will be able to hit its targets by 2030.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah, we have a long way to go. I would say in general, we need to be thinking about an order of magnitude larger than we have been. Instead of tens of megatons of reductions, we need hundreds of megatons of reductions. Instead of programs that are maybe have $5 or $10 billion, we need hundreds of billions of dollars in capital to be deployed to make this transformation. So we've started down the path, but we've got a long way to go.
Michael, as always, thank you for your insights.
Good to be with you.